Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's event, which is the SoA at Home Festival Shortlisted in Lockdown. My name is Robyn Law. I'm the Prizes and Awards Manager for the Society of Authors. We've got 4 fantastic shortlistees to introduce you to this afternoon. First, I'll introduce you to myself properly. I'm part of the team that administers over 20 prizes a year for fiction, non-fiction, poetry and translation. We'd like to thank our sponsors for all of our prizes, including ALCS, Nicholas Allen and the Paul Torday family for all of their generosity. The winners of our Society of Authors Awards will be announced next week on the 18th of June at 10 AM, and there's more information on our website about that if you'd like to get involved. So this event is part of the SoA at Home Festival. It's a 12-week programme of online events which runs until July. All the sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, then there's a link in the chat where you can do so. We've also set up a virtual bookshop with Blackwell's Bookshop, and all the shortlistees' books can be viewed together on their website, and you can access that by following a link which will also appear in the chat very shortly. The session itself will be roughly an hour. There'll be 10 to 20 minutes at the end for questions, so please do pop them in the chat as you think of them, and I'll come to them at the end. So we're going to start with a reading from each of our authors, but I'll introduce you to them first. So we have Rónán Hession, an Irish writer based in Dublin, and his short stories have been published in The Honest Ulsterman and The Bohemyth. His flash fiction has been published in Flash Fiction and Brilliant Flash Fiction. As Mumblin Def Ro, he has released 3 albums of storytelling songs, and he is shortlisted for the McKittrick Prize for Debut Novelists Over 40. Rónán, do you want to just give a wave?
Hello.
Hello. Gaby Koppel is a freelance TV producer and journalist with credits that include Crimewatch UK, The Experiment, Holocaust Memorial Day and Rip Off Britain. She also writes regularly for national newspapers and magazines, including The Guardian, The Daily Mail and the Jewish Chronicle. Currently dividing her time between London and MediaCityUK and Salford, she is one half of BergholtBrown film and TV production company with her husband, film director Stephen Brown. She is shortlisted for the Paul Torday Memorial Prize for Debut Novelists Over 60. Should you give us a wave, Gaby? Hello. Okechukwu Nzelu is a writer and teacher. He is born in Manchester in 1988, read English at Girton College, Cambridge, and completed the Teach First programme. His work has been published in Agenda, P&N Review, E-Magazine, and The Literature, and his essay, Troubles with God, will be published in the anthology Safe, on Black British Men Reclaiming Space, which will come out, which was Trapeze 2019. He is a winner of the Betty Trask Award and shortlisted for the Betty Trask Prize. Do you want to give a wave, okay? Hello. And then finally we have Catriona Ward, who was born in Washington, DC and grew up in the United States, Kenya, Madagascar, Yemen and Morocco. Ward's second novel, Little Eve, won the 2019 Shirley Jackson Award and the August Derleth Prize for the Best Horror Novel at the 2019 British Fantasy Awards, making her the only woman to have won the prize twice, and was a Guardian Best Book of 2018. She is shortlisted for a short story in the ALCS Tom Gallen Trust Award. And Kat, do you want to give us a wave? Hello. So firstly, I just wanted to say congratulations to all of you for your shortlisting. As we've been chatting a little bit before this started, it's a very weird time to be receiving accolades, but I'm really glad that you've been able to join us virtually this afternoon. We're going to start with a short reading from each of you. So just in order of surname, because there's no better way of doing it. Rónán, if you wanted to kick us off with a short reading.
Thanks very much, Robyn. So I'm going to read from the opening chapter of my novel, which is called Leonard and Hungry Paul. And it's just chapter 1 called Leonard. Leonard was raised by his mother alone with cheerfully concealed difficulty, his father having died tragically during childbirth. Though she was not by nature the soldiering type, she taught him to look at life as a daisy chain of small events, each of which could be made manageable in its own way. She was a person for whom kindness was a very ordinary thing, who believed that the only acceptable excuse for not having a bird feeder in the back garden was that you had one in the front garden. As sometimes happens with boys who prefer games to sports, Leonard had few friends but lots of ideas. His mother understood with intuitive good sense that children like Leonard just need someone to listen to them. They would set off to the shops, discussing conger eels, and have a deep conversation about Saturn's moons on the way back. They would talk about tidal waves at bath time, and say goodnight with a quick chat about the man with the longest fingernails in the Guinness Book of World Records. But Leonard grew up at a time when quiet, imaginative children did not yet enjoy the presumption of innocence. His mother often found herself having to take his side against ornery teachers who complained that they found it impossible to get through to him. With patient maternal endurance, she would sit by herself at parent-teacher meetings, explaining that, like his late father, he just lacked a eureka face. Even into his 30s, Leonard's mother still liked to fuss over him, buying his favourite ham for lunch, the one with fewer veins running through it, leaving tea by the bedside for when he woke up, and ironing well-meaning creases into his jeans, which Leonard would quietly iron out later. He repaid her thoughtfulness by keeping her company through her later years and generally including her in the uncredited bandwidth of his life. She had never really asked Leonard about girls, knowing the delicacy of the subject for him, and also because of her own doubts about whether his apparently celibate life was due to a lack of interest or opportunity. For Leonard, the fact that he still lived at home with his mother led to a certain self-restraint on practical grounds. He had wondered what would have happened had he brought a girl home only for them to wake up to 2 cups of tea at the bedside the next morning. His mother passed away unexpectedly one midweek night in her sleep, tucked into a duvet with her clothes all laid out for the next day, her neatness being a sign of her respect for the small things in her life. The doctor noted the cause of death as a heart attack, but emphasized that there were no signs of suffering or drama. He said that her heart must have simply run out of beats. Okay, so I'll stop there. Thanks, Robyn.
That was gorgeous. Thank you. Normally there would be rapturous applause, but you're just going to have to do with that from us. So next up for a short reading, Gaby, if you'd be willing to go next.
Yes, thank you very much, Robyn. So I'm going to read the introduction to the central character in my novel, who is mainly referred to as Mutti. She's in fact the mother of the narrator Elizabeth, and we first meet her the morning after she's gone missing in a rather drunken episode, and she's been thrown off her flight. So the family wakes up the morning after. The following day, I wake up in my old bed with the alarm going off. I force myself up. I can't afford to be too late for work, and there's 160 miles of M4 motorway between me and Shepherd's Bush. I pull on my jeans and stumble down to the kitchen. Mutti's sitting at the table, cleaning the sticky black nicotine goo out of her cigarette holders, with little torn-up twists of tissue, reading glasses pushed down on her nose. The bitter smell of nicotine and fresh smoke mingles in the air with the acrid aroma of mocha. A long quilted dressing gown of stained rose-pattern fabric is gaping over her round belly. Next to the ashtray full of brown-stained tissue twists lies a pile of crosswords cut out from the Daily Telegraph and a pencil, which she picks up now and then to write in an answer. "Good morning," she says with a bright smile. If she's got a hangover, she's hiding it well. "Morning," I mumble. "What do you want for breakfast?" "Just coffee." "Go on, I make you an eggie." A peace offering. For my mother, food has always been love on a plate. She brought me up on Streuselkuchen with Schlagsahne, and when I was 15, told me I was half a stone overweight. Her, the one in the crimped-clean tent. I etched my anger in blood-red ink into my diary. I stopped eating. I thought, that'll show her. She can do her 1,000-calorie diet from now until Christmas, but I'll drop half a stone before she's even opened that can of Weight Watchers soup. So what if my periods stop? Then she hoiks me off to the doctor, and it turns out they think I'm pregnant. As if. I look at her puppy pleading eyes. "No, honestly," I say, "I'll have something later, but I'll have some of that fresh coffee." I want to scream at her for forcing Dad and me to patrol the airport in the early hours, for making me late for work and then pretending nothing happened. But I find myself submitting to her forced warmth. It's easier. She puts the kettle on and clucks around, tidying things away and wiping green patterned splashback tiles with a damp J-cloth. My father comes down the stairs. I wait to see whether he says anything about the ordeal she's put us through. but he just makes himself a cup of lemon tea and pads off to the other room to watch the headlines on breakfast television, stopping only to give my mother a reassuring pat on the bum. I realise it's always been like this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much. Again, I'm sure there's lots of standing ovations happening in lots of living rooms. Okay, if you'd be happy to read next.
Sure. I'm going to read to you from an extract from my novel, The Private Joys of Nana Maloney. And it's a story mostly about Nana, who is half Nigerian, and her single mother, Joni White. And I'm going to read a little extract from when Joni picks Nana up from her part-time job. Nana's a teenager, by the way, just to give you a bit of context. Nana had her music in her ears at full volume. It was the Smiths, and she congratulated herself once again on the aptness of the music. She had appropriated the Meet His Murder album as the soundtrack to her life. This charming man was catchier, but her mother had said that she liked it. And she told herself, although not in so many words, that it was made for her. She listened to it on repeat. Sometimes when she was walking alone, she pretended she was in a gritty, low-budget movie about her life, and that the music was underscoring her every move, while an invisible audience watched, awestruck by her beauty and her sheer significance, although these things were worn so lightly, so carelessly, that you probably wouldn't notice them if somebody hadn't made a film about her and underscored it with the Smiths. Joni quickly wound up the window of her car and commanded her face to betray no reaction to the sound. Nana had worked at the takeaway part-time for most of the summer, and Joni was starting to get good at pretending. She held her facial expression fast and tried to busy herself with minutiae about the car to give the impression that she had other things on her mind. Before, air fresheners used to hang in thick, accusatory bunches in the rearview mirror, while Joni made tiny, explosive comments about the smell and suggested that Nana's personal hygiene might be partly to blame. Joni tried to ignore it now. Even as autumn was rolling in, even when, as now, it was very cold, she wound down her windows as far as they would go, which varied according to the car's mood, until she saw Nana coming out of the building. She wound up the windows when Nana arrived because not to do so would hurt Nana's feelings, but she convinced herself that the smell wasn't as bad if she'd given the car a good airing first. For her part, Nana only plonked herself down on the back seat of the car and said, "Thanks," with her headphones still in. For picking her up, Joni was never, ever late, and for not wanting to hurt her feelings, which were always out in the open. Nana knew why the car was cold. Love can be such a tiny thing. Neither of them even noticed it as they sat silently in the car, smelling of unholy meats, vowing to have a wash, a really good scrub at home.
That's lovely. Thank you. I think everyone thinks that when they've got a really good track on in their headphones, don't they? just me and teenage girls. Good.
And me and teenage girls, yeah.
Kat, if you would be happy to read next.
Sure. I'm going to read from Little Eve, which is my second novel. I'm just going to read the beginning. Diner, 1921. My heart is a dark passage, lined with ranks of gleaming jars. In each one, something floats. The past, preserved as if in spirit. Here is the scent of grass and the sea. Here the creak of wheels on a rough path. Here a bright yellow gull's beak. The sensation of blood drying on my cheek in the wind. Abel crying for his mother. Uncle's hand on me. Silver on a white collarbone. The knowledge of loss, which comes like a blow to the heart or the stomach. It does not reach your mind until later. She is there too, of course, Evelyn, somewhere along the rows, behind glass. She floats in the dim air. I do not seek her out. My survival depends on that. After everything and against all odds, I have been given a chance, a life, never mind what kind. I have people who depend on me and I on them, never mind who they are. I am filled with memory, and I must make room in the dark passage, so I cast it forth this day. I give it to you. This is the day I became what I am. On the morning of the 2nd of January, 1921, James McGrath was roused by silence. The storm that had raged across the coast for 3 days had passed. Thrushes and waxwings sang in the silver birch trees that lined Loyal's narrow cobbled street. It was 6:30, and there would be no dawn in these northern reaches for some hours. Jamie was 28 years of age, in good health, and had never married. He dressed by the light of a candle in front of a small square of glass that hung on the wall above the chest of drawers. A vest, thick woolen socks with gaiters, the collar of his cotton shirt tied together with a bright red kerchief, a sheepskin waistcoat smelling strongly of linen. He painstakingly worked up lather from a sliver of shaving soap that's dropped his razor. He put in his dental plate, filling the dark gap on the left side of his upper jaw with a white incisor and canine. The teeth had been lost in a blast in France. Last of all, he put on with care the cufflinks his father had left to him. These were battered silver, inlaid with yellowing ivory, and Jamie McGrath had always loved them. When he held them in his hand, he felt the sway of a long trunk, the gentle tread of a great foot on dusty earth. He caught the scent of flowering hibiscus. The cufflinks also made him recall his father's death.
Brilliant. So ominous. Fantastic. Thank you so much. They were all really wonderful readings. It's a real treat to hear, especially when public readings aren't happening so much anymore. It's really lovely. So I have some questions for each of you. And then, as I said, if you're watching, please do put more questions in the chat and we'll come to them later. So just to kick us off, Rónán, I think you could tell as well in the section that you've just read, there's a lot of gentleness has been described as running through your book. I wonder if you think that's led people to enjoy it more in what's a particularly anxious time, and also if you could just tell us a little bit more about the book in general.
Thanks, Robyn. Yeah, the book is my simple description. When people ask me what it's about, I say it's about gentle people, and really it's about the people who get overlooked in life. We know what sort of loud people think, and we know what confident people think because they tell us. But there are many people in life who are overlooked, and it really looks at the story of people who are maybe on the margins and how they try to get the sort of biting point between engaging with the world without getting overwhelmed by it. So there's a lot of emphasis on. It's quite a slow-moving book. There, in a way, you could say that it isn't very plot-driven. But it also is a sort of celebration of things like silence and about slowing down and paying attention. So it's quite seasonal for a lot of people, I think, in the sense that those who've had to change their lifestyle or they're spending a lot of time inside, and a lot of people have said to me that they picked it up in the last few months and really found it resonated with what they were going through. I've also noticed actually on social media and so on, I've seen a lot of people sort of asking for more positive books. And it's interesting for our reading habits, I think, tend to be naturally drawn towards maybe the darker side of life. And so I think there is a certain sense that this is a good time to read it.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Something actually completely different though from yours, Gaby. One of the central themes of your book is trauma. I wonder if you'd be able to tell us a little bit about reparation, and then also some of the research that went into it, as it's quite a complex narrative that's part detective story but also part family drama.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, I mean, I suppose my starting point in a way was the thought that trauma does get passed from generation to generation. You know, my parents were both refugees, and so growing up, I suppose I became more and more conscious of what they'd gone through. Sadly, my mother in particular passed away before I'd really had a chance to talk to her about what had happened. And so in a way, I kind of I didn't want to write a memoir. I wanted to explore the emotions without being tied down to what actually happened in reality. But I was very much driven by that idea of how the next generation has had their lives completely and utterly affected by what their parents' generation experienced. And so the central character, Muti, who I described in my reading, is a woman who survived the Holocaust in Hungary. And it's a sort of, I always find that people are very familiar with what happened in Germany and Poland, but Hungary is a sort of lesser known story, and it is a very separate story whereby the Hungarian had their own fascist regime, but during the course of 1944, Germany invaded and they deported 75% of Hungarian Jewry to Auschwitz. This is the story of an older woman who wants, the reason it's called reparation is that she wants to get, as she gets older, she feels as though now is the time has come in her life, but she feels as though she is due some sort of reparation from the Hungarian government for things that they did to her during the war. But she's a traumatized woman. Her whole emotional life has been severely scarred by the experiences that she endured, not only during the war, but I suppose the other thing that I am interested in exploring, not only in this book, but hopefully in my next one, is that, the way I see it, family dysfunction happened before, during and after the Holocaust. There were, people didn't have perfect lives before that were completely ruined afterwards if they survived. There was a lot, my mother came from quite a dysfunctional family and she carried that with her all her life. And I suppose, obviously, the character Mutti is not my mother, but she bears a lot of resemblance to my mother. And it was a useful way of sort of exploring some things that I knew about, but also finding out things that I didn't know about. And as far as the research process is concerned, I did read a lot of books about what happened in Hungary during the war, and but I had to be honest, a lot of the research was a sort of internal thing where I had to sort of think a lot about how the processes affected the personality. And I was very angry with my mother even to the point when she died. And, the process of trying to re-examine the sort of very, very heavy kind of family life that we had, really, I feel as though, I do feel as though I have forgiven her. I should have forgiven her earlier, because I think I've entered into, kind of emotionally some of her experiences. And I did go to Budapest, but to be honest, the research I did in Budapest was mainly, I met a couple of old friends of the family and I walked around a lot, really, to get the atmosphere, because a lot of things that actually happen in Budapest are more, they're more, I've just created them, I've imagined them. And that's the freedom that I wanted from writing fiction, because otherwise I would have written a memoir.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. So now I've got a question for you, OK, if you wouldn't mind as well telling us a little bit about your novel, The Private Joys of Nana Maloney. But imagine as a male author writing a female protagonist, you probably get a question about the complications of doing that all the time. So I thought it'd be nice to say, what was the joy of writing strong female voices central to your narrative?
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, so The Private Joys of Nana Maloney, it's a comedy about girl called Nana, who is, she's about to turn 17. She lives in Manchester with her single mum, Joni, who is white. She's never met her Nigerian father, and she doesn't know why. Her mum refuses to talk about him in any real detail, and whenever Nana asks about him, it becomes this very uncomfortable conversation. And so the novel sort of follows their relationship from going from this very tender relationship full of humour and warmth and sort of mutual understanding to something more strained when Nana starts asking questions about her father because she can't bear to not know any longer. And it's about their sort of journey towards understanding of themselves and each other. And we as a reader, we see through flashbacks what happened between Joni and Nana's father. And yeah, I really enjoyed writing this novel. It's very hard. Comedy is hard. But it is a lot of fun as well. And the question about the female voice is an interesting one. You're right, I do get that question a lot, which is I suspect because there's a track record perhaps of men writing quite badly in female voices, because we don't necessarily get that question for women writers who, when women write in male voices, perhaps women are better at doing it. It was an interesting one because I think the temptation certainly is to focus on the immediate things that make a woman's experience of voice different from a man's, and that tends to skew towards the anatomical. want to, you know, there's that famous sort of she-breasted boobly down the stairs trope, which I was really keen to avoid. I think what I loved about writing Nana's story was that, yes, there were elements of her experience which are very different from mine. You know, I think that being a teenage girl is hard in a way that being a teenage boy perhaps isn't. And there are things that Nana is vulnerable to that I wasn't as a teenage boy. But I think that, you know, this came from, it was a very interesting experience doing this, because at first I thought, I'm writing about female characters, I need to do some research, I need to make sure that I've got some research behind this so I can really just what I'm writing. And I was reading, you know, accounts of motherhood and things like that. And then I thought, this feels very artificial. I can't see myself working this into what I'm going to write. It doesn't feel organic. And of course, I just thought, well, you know, I can use what experiences have I read about or heard about, and that I can use. My own mum was a single mum when I was a teenager. That's an experience that I really wanted to reflect, because it's been a really profound impact on me. It really affects how I think about all sorts of things, especially feminism. And I really wanted to reflect that. And I didn't want it to be a PR exercise, but at the same time, when I was Nana's age, there was, and maybe to an extent there still is, but there was a great amount of stigma, I think, about single mum families. This idea that it was sort of this, that the blame is on the single mum, or that, you know, it's terribly unstable, unhappy environment. You know, it's not necessarily an easy one, and certainly isn't for Nana and Joni all the time, but I wanted to give a much more human, full trail of that. And I wanted to include some of the joy of that. And one of the best things for me about writing this novel was the conversations between Nana and her mum. They're very, they have a funny, warm relationship. And that's why I think that it starts to feel sad when the two of them, when that strain comes in, when Nana starts asking these questions and her mum just doesn't want to tell them. I really wanted to portray that sort of sense of loss, because what they have initially, however superficially, they have this really warm, loving relationship, which I hope I portrayed through that reading.
Yeah, no, definitely. Thank you. And yeah, I always remember breasted boobly downstairs as being a fantastic, the organic movement that breasts can create when the person who they belong to is still. So finally, Kat, some questions. So the short story that you are shortlisted for the prize is The Pier at Ardentini, which is quite deliciously sinister. And I wondered if you'd be able to tell me a little bit about writing it, but also what draws you to the horror genre generally.
Well, so first of all, to take the second part of the question first, the horror genre. I'm not entirely sure such a thing exists as a discrete genre. I think of horror, and there's a wonderful description of the Gothic, which is that it's more like a virus that adapts through time and attaches itself to other genres. It's very difficult to define horror by what it is. If you look at something like White as for Witch by Helen Oyeyemi, and compare that to the movie Saw, it's very difficult to say what those two things have in common, and yet under broadly speaking, they both come under the horror genre. I think all good writing contains at its heart some horror. And I think that if what is classed as horror, if it affects you in that sense and it punches your heart like that, then it is also good writing. I think there's a huge, I think it may come down to, I don't know, it may come down to as simple a thing as marketing. For instance, now in publishing, horror is a bit of a dirty word. You say Gothic instead, or like supernatural thriller, or it's gone out of fashion. So it may just be a word that word to put over a bookshelf. I don't know. I think all my novels and the story itself as well are gothic in their nature, and the Gothic for me is a very powerful, specific way of talking about particularly power imbalances in power structures and the patriarchy, and sort of addressing kind of through these like looming supernatural means, addressing these real world concerns. I think it's a very relevant genre now. I think, you know, that it deals with the language and dynamics of oppression. So I think that's what draws me to writing about that. I think also the supernatural, if you're talking about a ghost story in particular, or talking about that particular kind of Gothic fiction, there's a sort of innate morality to it, which runs right at its core. For instance, a ghost in its nature, by its nature, just to take this example, a ghost by its nature expresses, in the traditional sense, is the physical expression of a wrong so deep that the universe almost revolts at it to produce this anomaly, which is the ghost. And the narrative is about the wrong that created that either being righted or not. You're sort of dealing with such a deeply moral universe, which doesn't exist in real life. It's a created one for the fictional narrative. You know, we don't get that kind of justice in the world. If a terrible wrong is done in life, sometimes it just is done, and the world goes on. But not in Gothic literature, and not in a ghost story. There is a commensurate reaction, whether or not that gets resolved or not in a way that we would like. There's a sort of innately ethical universe that you exist in. And with the Pierrot Ardentinians specifically, I wanted to talk about. I wanted to present a narrator who seems like a bit of a dick, to be honest. She seems like a manipulative and usurious person, and what she's trying, her aim throughout the story is to marry a very rich man, which automatically places her in a bit of a gold digger category. But as the narrative progresses, the reason for the title, which is the Pierrot Ardentini, is that if you look into this particular loch, you see, with your true love, you see their true nature reflected back in the water. So it's all about what people are really underneath when you peel away the layers, the onion skin layers, and who in fact is the culprit, who is the evildoer at the heart of it. And so you start out really not liking her very much, I don't think. But as the narrative progresses, and you start to see her true reflection back, as if in the water. Sorry, that was another long answer to your question.
No, it's incredibly interesting though. Thank you. Really, I've never really thought about that kind of ethical universe of horror, but you're completely right. There is that kind of sense that there are wrongs that are expelled by it.
It's quite a reassuring genre in a way.
Yeah. No, I've never thought of it that way, but it's completely true. So I have a question for all of you now, actually, which is that obviously you received this news about your shortlisting in lockdown, which we were talking before is kind of like receiving it in a vacuum. So I wanted to ask more joyfully, I guess, if you did anything to celebrate, each of you. Maybe starting with Rónán again?
Yeah, I didn't do anything to celebrate it, actually. And in a way, it almost feels like the pause button is pressed on all this. And I would like to do something when it's all over, maybe. But no, I didn't really. I was really happy about it. You know, I think the way this is a debut novel for me, so it's written in an environment where you never expect it to be published, never mind nominated for an award. So, and the book was published last year. So I'm at a stage now where my nervousness about the book, it's found its readers. I've got over that. And it was just a very nice piece of encouragement, really. So I enjoy it at that sort of level at the moment. And actually that's quite a nice feeling. I think if there were an award ceremony, I'd probably be very sort of focused on the night and, getting my tux cleaned and locked down and that kind of stuff. So I think it's been nice to separate the recognition from the hoo-ha.
Brilliant. Gaby, okay?
Well, actually, I did have a very lockdown experience on getting the news because I was in a big Zoom meeting. I was on the team producing Health Check UK Live, which is a big daily programme on BBC One, which ran for a total of 5 weeks. And so I did the thing that you'd never do when you're in a big meeting with lots of other people and senior execs and things, that look at my personal emails. And it was kind of, and I can't remember if I had luckily I think I was muted at the time, because they would have heard me screaming around the house. Because that's, I mean, it is, I took redundancy at the age of 50 when I was in a staff job at the BBC to do a master's degree in creative writing. And it took me a lot of, many years to get published, and it's been quite a long journey. So it's, that's kind of that little bit of recognition, that acknowledgement that you haven't been totally wasting your time. It's means so much, and it was all summed up in that one moment, and I had to apologise to the execs involved.
Okay, any screaming?
Plenty of screaming. Yeah, my editor rang me to explain to tell me about the shortlisting and the award. It was just wonderful. It was just she does this. She gives me this really exciting news and gives me no warning, and then I scream, and then I think she's sort of used to it now. She did that reveal, and with this shortlisting, I think she's used to it now. But it was really wonderful, even though obviously we're in lockdown and we haven't been able to sort of celebrate it the way that we normally would do. Sher and I, we had a sort of a Zoom champagne toast thing, which is really nice to do. Because you're right. I think, Gaby, what you say is absolutely right. We have this huge build-up to publishing. My book took me sort of eight-ish years to write, and well, I redrafted it several times, but it took a long time to get there. And then suddenly it's out in the world, and then to have this kind of recognition is just, it means the world. So it was really nice to just take a few moments to sort of to mark it quietly over Zoom. Yeah.
Same for you, Kat?
Yeah, I mean, you do, as Gaby and OK and Rónán were all saying, you often feel like you do your writing and you throw it into a big vacuum. That's what it feels like. It's such a long process. You're saying, okay, it took you 7 years to write your book. It took me about a similar amount of time for me to write my debut. It's such a long process, and then quite often you just feel like there doesn't seem to be any reaction from the universe, and these small nods and acknowledgements, well, not small, I mean very significant nods and acknowledgements, just mean the world, really. And it always feels like a huge surprise. It's a very surprised that anyone's read it, or that it has indeed been published, and it's not some great joke that someone's playing on you. It really means the absolute world. I mean, particularly, I don't consider myself really a short story writer primarily. Well, but I've obviously, because I think short stories also have to contain almost like the thesis of the universe, whereas a novel can just be about a moment in time. Easy. It's a joke. But it's a different discipline, and I never thought I was particularly good at it. So that felt like a huge, massive moment.
Yeah, but just what you've touched on there, which is, I mean, primarily a question for you, but you all kind of write or do things in different disciplines, so I'll open it out afterwards as well. But Kat, so I was going to ask, in terms of writing short fiction or writing longer form, do you have one that you prefer? I think you've just mentioned that you do find short stories harder, or do you find that they actually help one another if you're writing them at the same time?
I think with novels, because they take so long to write, they just take so long, that there's such a beauty to the short story, because you can finish it. You can finish it within your lifetime, which seems like a huge advantage. I also think that because they are a slightly more perfect enclosed universe, they can kickstart ideas and make you feel more agile in your writing. Because if you're just working very, very consistently on one project, day after day after day, there comes a sort of stage of despair, which I think everybody reaches, where it's like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Whereas if you have something that not only can you take from start to finish in a reasonable amount of time, but that also uses that slightly different dynamic to express itself much more, kind of a different level of economy. And as I said, I think a short story has to be more has to have more of the universal meaning in it than, in a way, the novel does. The novel can take its time and describe things at a very different pace. I do think they're very different art forms, and I found that getting better at the short story made me a much better novelist in the long run. I hope. Who can say? Maybe that's wrong. I don't know. But I would hope.
Anyone else? Because I think you've all written short form fiction or journalism of some kind at the same time.
Yeah, I've written I've written sort of articles and comment pieces, and at first I thought that was going to be a very difficult thing to do while working on long form fiction. But actually, it became this quite nice. The only sort of analogy I can think of is that sort of outdated practice of using to draw blood. I think it's just very nice in a way to have like an idea that you've been working on. It's really nice to be able to put it aside for a minute and just put it into an article that's sort of 500 words long or whatever it is, and then the idea with a novel can sort of keep going, and it sort of frees you up. And it's actually, I don't know if I'd find it easy to write a long form non-fiction piece. Something like that might be a lot harder and more demanding than maybe just sort of 100 words. But I really like that opportunity to just be able to take a little thought that I'd had that had been weighing on my mind, that I've been developing, and being able to sort of put it into that genre. I really liked it. Yeah.
I mean, I find writing journalism it's just a completely different experience, actually, and in a way easier, because most of when I write journalism, there's a factual basis. I can see the finished article when I start. I know exactly where I'm going. With fiction, and I'm experiencing this very much with my second novel, which I'm wrestling with at the moment. Mm-hmm. I think, you hinted at this sort of. It's not a straightforward journey where you just write down what you've got in your head. You've got these, it's so. When you read a finished novel, it looks so obvious that that's how the plot should be.
Yeah.
But when I'm trying to work out the plot, I mean, I'm completely stuck at the moment because I'm trying to. Yeah, I think I gave myself a migraine because I was just kind of so bound up with trying to. How do I put that event before? How do I make? What are the consequences of, and it's just because it's coming from inside you, you're creating it all. It hasn't got the same obvious structure. It's all, the creative process is, for me, a lot more tortured.
It's so personal as well, isn't it? It's really tortured. It's so personal. Just...
Yeah. So do you, with them, because you do lyrics that are kind of storytelling medium as well, do you find those more difficult because there's a musical element involved, or easier because of the kind of shortness and clarity of them sometimes?
Song lyrics have a huge advantage over writing prose in that you have a melody, and the melody is essentially sort of electric charge that energizes the lyrical idea. So you don't have that in prose. One of the things I've noticed, I finished my second book and handed it into my publisher about 6 weeks ago. In the meantime, I was asked to write a short story, and I'm not really a short story writer. I've written a few okay ones. And my official policy is that, we shouldn't distinguish based on length. In the same way, someone doesn't write, someone will say, oh, I'm a painter of small paintings and I'm a painter of big paintings. They're just paintings. We don't distinguish on size. But in reality, I think in short story, you have to think a lot more carefully around structure. And I think Claire Keegan, the Irish writer, has a very good expression where she talks about that stories are an incision in time. And I think you need to, in a short story, think a lot more carefully about where you make the incision. So I think I've just finished a short story, which I really enjoyed. And effectively what I ended up doing was writing a 2,700 word novel. That was my solution, which is kind of it has 23 chapters in 2,700 words. So it's kind of, I just dodged the question really. But one thing I do think, if you move between, because I've done music and short fiction, and I'm a civil servant in my day job, so I do a lot of writing and that, and I've done novels as well, that the more you do you switch forms, I think it's more obvious the distinction between the inspiration, imagination, creative energy bit, and then the form bit. And it's your relationship with the creative energy sort of side of things that you need to nurture, and the form is a second, is sort of a following question. I think if you work exclusively in one form, you can end up confusing those two things, and you think that a technical problem is an ideas problem, and an ideas problem is a technical problem. So I think it's helped me moving different forms to be able to distinguish those two different sides to the job.
Have you ever written a story across two mediums, or do you find that each story has its own specific need to be in a certain medium? Like, have you got like music and a short story that they're about the same thing, or do they need to be specifically in their own? Do they find their own medium?
In my case, I haven't repeated an idea. I've sometimes found that when I first started writing, I thought an easy thing to do would be to try a collection of short stories where I basically ripped off stuff I've written in music. But you know, your inspiration doesn't like that and stops you doing it. That was my experience. You know, it calls you out when you try to be inauthentic. But I think that can be done. Like I'm reading a book of poetry by a writer called Dan O'Brien, a US writer, and it was based on a work of a war correspondent, and he turned it into a book of poetry and a play, both very successfully. Wow. So some people can do that. I can't myself.
What you've actually done in your discussion is quite beautifully answered a question that we had sent ahead of time, which was for you, Rónán, which was how has your creative background as a musician contributed to your creative experience as a writer? So that was from B. Sinot. So thank you for speaking on that. I think we've got quite a few questions popping up in the chat. So I'll just go to those for now. The one that's just for everyone is how is the pandemic, which is from, Guinevere Glassford-Brown, which is a fantastic name, which is, how is the pandemic shaping your written work? Are you writing into it as a subject or away from it?
It's giving me space and time because I'm not in TV production at the moment. So unusually I've got time. My kids aren't living at home. So I'm not writing about the pandemic. I suppose my inspiration isn't really so much factual events. My starting point's always an emotion, because the starting point for my journalism is always something factual, and the starting point for my fiction is a feeling or a perception or a moment. And I mean, I'm not talking from a wealth of experience here because I'm on my second novel. The idea of the short story, by the way, terrifies me, that you would sort of take a perfectly good idea and dispose of it in 2,700 words. And then have for another one. They don't have that thick and fast for me. I have got one. I have tried once writing a short story, and I'm not sure if it was a great success. So moving swiftly on. It's the space, isn't it? It's the boredom. It's the opportunity to do nothing and think and write a bit and then go to the supermarket because you get stuck. You know, I've got to or go for a 2-hour walk to listen to music and think about ideas.
I think there's also a practical consideration at work as well, which is that anything you write now, in terms of publishing times, will not be seen by the public for another 1.5 years, 2 years. We have no idea what the world's going to look like in that time. I suspect that whatever we think we know now will be rapidly out of date. So it's a bit difficult to write about something that we don't really know what it is yet. I also think that, certainly just a very minimal amount I've heard publishing people say about it is, it's not really what they want. They're not looking to kind of, they're not seeking out the kind of story, because I don't know. I suppose it's in order to write about it competently and articulately, you have to know more about it. But also, I think people are very tired. They're very tired, and I think in this particular instance, perhaps there are, like any other kind of universe, is preferable to enter into than the one we're in now. The one we're in now, because I think everyone's just got fatigue about about the state of the world slightly.
It feels kind of ripe for Gothic. It's kind of, there's a kind of a rear window quality to everyone's lives at the moment.
Yeah, there is. And I don't know if you've lived it, you necessarily want to read about it. I mean, some people are putting it into their narratives. I've read a couple of novelists who are saying that it's, you know, they're adjusting books that they've already written to accommodate for the new reality that we're living in now. So, you know, social distancing, and I don't know. It's an interesting set of questions, isn't it, that it poses?
Yeah. We've got another one from Wendy Greenberg, which is for our 3 debut novelists, who's asking, is this the first novel you've had published or the first you've written? So has the content been, she uses the word festering for years, but maybe
They do fester, actually.
simmering for years. So we'll try that.
For me, yeah, this is my first novel that I've written, and also the first one that was published. But it went through, as I said, so many different drafts and versions. You know, there are characters who didn't make it into the book that is published now. There are storylines that didn't make it in. There are characters who are now in a different form from the ones they appeared in earlier. And I suspect that's probably quite normal for a first novel. I think that I think it was something we talked about earlier, this idea that your first novel, it takes so long, partly because it's a soup of all the experiences and thoughts that you've ever had, in a way, and you need to spend some time reducing that soup. I'm just going to stretch this analogy as far as it can go. You need to sort of spend some time sort of refining it and thinking about what you want the final product to be like. And like Gaby said, at the end, it seems, oh, of course you have these characters and nobody else, and of course it ends this way, but the process of sort of editing it down is really hard. So yeah, I think in a way festering is probably the right word, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I did an interview once with Naomi Alderman, and she said how when she first wrote The Power, she wrote 180,000 words, and then she threw it away and she wrote it again. She got rid of everything. She said there were too many inciting incidents, there were too many issues. She got rid of the whole thing. She started again from scratch, and I nearly wept.
Ooh, I think I might weep. I just turn off my camera for a second.
Well, if I can have a go at that. Hi, Wendy. Yep. So it's my first novel I finished. It's not the first novel I started. But I actually, you did reach a point, and I suppose every debut novelist must think this. You think, what am I writing about? Why am I writing? You know, you think you can start a story. Do I just want to tell a story? What's the point of all this? And it does make you, I mean, I did try various other things. But the kind of crunch point for me was that I did the master's degree in creative writing at City University, which I don't know if anybody else has done one, but for me, I had to go through that process, and it was really fantastic. The way it was structured then, and it's changed now, was that you did 2 terms of taught workshop-y type things, and then you're sent away for 2 terms to write your 60,000 word novel that you have to write to graduate. And as we were, just before we left the room, our tutor, Jonathan Myerson, said, write about what you know. He said, you don't want to spend the next 2 terms doing research, write about what you know. And it was such a light bulb moment for me. Suddenly, I knew what the one I was going to complete was going to be about, or I had a vision of it somehow.
My case is a little bit different. You know, I sort of gave up music in 2012, and sort of had planned to give up creativity. And then I sort of realized it's not something you can give up. It's like your sense of humor. It's just sort of always there. So the book came out quite quickly. I wrote the first draft in 3 months. I just worked 6 nights a week. I start work when my kids go to bed, so about 10 o'clock at night. And then I edited for about 8 or 9 months before submitting it. But I think there was a build-up of energy. Certainly, what started me, I didn't intend to write a book. I'd never had an ambition to be a writer. But I was getting very strong flashes of the book, which prompted me to write it. So, and I think that was, even though I wasn't working on it for those 5 years, the 3 albums I did all of 5 years between them, I think there's a personal growth. There's stuff that builds up inside you and that needs to sort of expression. And so while I wasn't constantly working on a book, I think it certainly contains the sort of fruition of the stuff I was thinking about in that period.
I mean, and Kat, I mean, not nominated for your debut novel, but you have obviously had a debut novel. Was that the first that you'd written, or had you written others first?
It was. I worked on it for so many years. I must have written the equivalent of about 6 or 7 books, over and over and over. I did a Naomi Alderman at least. Was it Naomi Alderman?
Yeah.
I did a Naomi Alderman at least twice. I just chucked it. And it breaks your heart, but it was always for the best. So it was the same book, but my goodness, I think I must have written at least 5 versions of it. Which is heartbreaking in its own way, really.
Yeah.
But we get it done.
And here you are.
Here we are.
One last thing that I did want to ask you, because we are coming to the end of our time, was just something that I ask everybody because I am genuinely interested, is what are you reading at the moment? So maybe start with Rónán.
I've just finished a book called Holiday Heart, which is by Margarita Garcia Raballo, and it's translated by Charlotte Coombe. She's a Colombian writer. She had a short story collection published last year called Fish, published by Charcoal Press. And I've just started The Other Name by John Foss, and that's translated by Damien Searles, a Norwegian writer. It was longlisted for the International Booker. So it's a very slow book, and I'm enjoying that, actually.
Fabulous. Okay.
I'm reading 2 things at the moment because I can never, ever just stick to one. I'm rereading Persuasion by Jane Austen because it's... I just love Jane Austen. I think she's brilliant.
The letter at the end of that book is one of the most beautiful things I read.
Jane Austen does a really good letter. You can say what you want about her, but she knows how to write a letter.
Yeah, she does.
And A Girl with a Louding Voice by Abby Darby, I'm also reading.
Fantastic. Gaby?
Well, at the moment I'm reading Lionel Shriver's latest. Ever since I read we got to talk about Kevin, I absolutely huge fan of Lionel Shriver. I think she always got a fantastic knack of sort of getting the zeitgeist and, spearing it. But also, shameless plug, 2 of my other shortlisted novels. I'm desperate to kind of read all the other writers that are shortlisted in my category, but I thought I'll start with 2 and hopefully get through them as quickly as I can.
Yeah, lovely. And Kat?
I'm reading a couple of things for review, which I won't count because I'm being told to read them. But I just finished Survivor Song by Paul Tremblay, which is basically about how to give birth in the zombie apocalypse. Surviving, it's incredibly moving. It doesn't sound like the ingredients for an incredibly moving novel. It really is. And then my boyfriend and I have a little reading book club that we started, a book club of 2, in which we discuss a book every week. This is what lockdown does to us. And our book is The Confessions of Franny Langton, which is a Gothic novel, but the particular lens the Gothic takes in this is to examine race and slavery. So,
and another one of our shortlistees, in fact.
Indeed. There we go.
Well done. Brand, everyone. Well done. Right. So thank you so much for coming to chat to me this afternoon. It's been a real pleasure. There's been a lot of love in the chat. I apologise I couldn't get to all the questions, but you all had such wonderful things to say. So just to finish up, as I mentioned, all of these sessions are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund to support authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis, please visit the GoFundMe link, which is in the chat. Some other events that we've got coming up. Tomorrow we have an afternoon tea session with Sarah Waters, one of this year's judges for the Paul Torday Memorial Prize. Plus, you can tune in for the winners announcement on the 18th of June at 10 a.m. And once again, please do visit the Blackwell's link because we're wonderfully set up as an affiliate. So if you buy books from that link, you will also be donating a percentage to the Authors Emergency Fund. So you get a book and you help somebody out at the same time. All the shortlistees books are there together. If you want to keep asking people questions on Twitter or keep the conversation going, then the hashtag is SoA at home. Once again, thank you to everyone, and we'll see you more from you on the 18th.
Thank you, Robyn.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.